This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Okay, members, we'll make a start, and thank you for those who joined us on Starleaf. And just to outline the meeting today, The key issues: 2 oral evidence sessions on the Troubles Permanent Disablement Pension Scheme, first from Capita and the second from the Department. Formal clause-by-clause consideration of the damages return investment bill, consideration of a proposed timetable for the Justice Bill, and the consideration of the statutory rule. There's also the written papers providing the legal aid update on progress to the implementation of the NIAO Office and Public Accounts Committee recommendations and action plan to address fraud and error, and further information on the Interim Victims of Crime Commissioner. Welcome all to the committee, and also just to remind members that the use of mobile devices, as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted, this also includes members' tablet devices, they can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. We are declared to declare any financial or other relevant interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence our approach to the matter under consideration. Any member who has an interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arising in the meeting. If there's no members to declare, thank you. Can I have your agreement for the 2 oral evidence sessions of the committee, the formal clause-by-clause consideration to be reported by Hansard? Agreed. Can I also welcome Mr. Stephen Corr, who's joining us today via Starleaf to the meeting. Stephen has joined the committee team this week and will be supporting the work of the committee in his capacity as clerical supervisor. So Stephen, you're very welcome, and we look forward to working with you. Can I also thank the Deputy Chair, Sinead, for chairing last week's meeting, as I was unable to attend, and we do appreciate how efficiently she carried out the business, and I hope I can keep the standard that she set last week. So we'll proceed without any further delay. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Shah.
The agenda item 1 are apologies. We have an apology from Emma and also from Peter. Robin Newton will be joining us later. And just to advise that Rachel and Gemma and Doug are joining us by Starleaf, and we welcome them to today's meeting. Just to advise members that if any have indicated they have delegated authority to their vote on behalf as provided for by Standing Order 115, Emma has delegated her vote to the Deputy Chair, Sinead, and Peter has delegated his vote to myself. Agenda item 2 are the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September. That's at pages 5 to 14 of the meeting pack for the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September. If you're content that these minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings, can you indicate that that's the case? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And I will sign accordingly. Item agenda 3 is matters arising. The Department of Justice response regarding the likely impact of the new legislative framework for the personal injury discount rate. At the meeting on the 16th of September, members of the committee agreed to seek an assurance from the Department of Justice that it is keeping other departments fully informed about developments in respect of the new legislative framework for the personal injury discount rate, and this is being reflected in the discussions to secure funding between the Department of Finance and the Treasury. The Department has confirmed that all departments have been made aware of the financial implications arising from both the recent change to the PIDR and the new methodology, and it understands that discussions are ongoing with the Treasury. The relevant correspondence is at pages 16 to 19 of the meeting pack, and that is to note, and also that the response will be added to the electronic folder bill. The committee also wrote to the Department of Finance on the funding position, and the response is in the table pack and will be discussed when we come under item agenda number 6. Item 2, the committee forward work programme. The updated committee forward work programme for October, reflecting the changes agreed at last week's meeting, have been provided pages 20 to 22 of today's pack for information. Item 3 is the Protection from Stalking Bill oral evidence session with the Department of Justice officials on the 14th of October. Officials from the Department will attend the committee meeting on that date to discuss the issues raised in the oral and written evidence received on the Protection from Stalking Bill and answer members' questions. At the meeting of the 23rd of September, the committee agreed that members could provide details of any particular issues that they wish to raise with the Department in advance of the meeting to ensure that officials are prepared and can provide the relevant information. And can I ask members to forward any issues they may wish to raise to the committee office, if at all possible, by 3 p.m. Tomorrow afternoon. If they have not already done so, these then will be provided to the Department in preparation for the session on the 14th of October. Agenda item 4 brings us to the Troubles Permanent Disablement Pension Scheme, the oral evidence session with representatives of Capita. The representatives from Capita are attending the meeting today to discuss the operations of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Pension. The relevant papers for this session and the next session with the Department officials are at pages 24 to 69 of the meeting pack. And can I, at this stage, welcome to the meeting and welcome in person Mr. Antony King, Managing Director of the Client Partner of Capita Health and Welfare, Brendan Flynn, the Northern Ireland Client Engagement Director of Capita Health and Welfare, and Dr. Shah Faisal, Chief Medical Officer at Capita Health and Welfare. And can I thank the three gentlemen for their help in preparation for this meeting today, the correspondence that you have previously sent to us, your engagement with this committee to date, and also your presence here this afternoon. It is very much appreciated. And just to advise us all that the session will be reported by Hansard and a transcript will be published on the committee's webpage. And can I at this stage then invite Mr. King to make a brief opening remark highlighting any particular issues he wishes to draw to the attention of the committee in relation to the role of Capita in respect of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme. And maybe just as well before we proceed, can I just to, so that it's known by the representatives from Capita, that a very useful informal meeting took place yesterday with the President of the Victims Payment Board, Justice McLinden, during which he outlined the role of the board, how the process will work, the safeguards to prevent any re-traumatisation of victims, the accountability arrangements, and a note of that meeting will be circulated to committee members later, but I think it was only right that we also inform yourselves that that meeting took place. I found it extremely useful, and I look forward to this engagement this afternoon. So Antony, over to yourself. And then after this, if members could indicate to me then if they have particular questions, then we will work our way through those. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to make some brief opening remarks. Before I do that, I thought it might be helpful just to expand on the roles that we three play in Capita. So as Managing Director for Health and Welfare, that means I have ultimate accountability and responsibility for all the work Capita does across those sectors. On my left, I've got Dr. Shah Faisal, and Shah is responsible as Chief Medical Officer for all matters clinical across health and welfare. And on my right, I've got Brendan, and Brendan has been heavily involved on the ground with the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme since the beginning, and will continue to be so in the coming months. I'd also like to thank the committee for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. We strongly believe that the transparency and governance around this committee is really important to maintain confidence in it. And so the opportunity to answer your questions, any concerns that you have today is really welcome. But this doesn't have to be a one-time date for us. We'd be more than happy to come back in the coming months to talk about progress as the scheme rolls out. And indeed, you're all very welcome to come to our offices or talk to us individually at any time with any concerns that you have. This scheme is hugely important for those who've been affected by the Troubles and the conflict in Northern Ireland and indeed across all of the UK. And it's for that reason that we've put those people at the very heart of the design of the scheme and will continue to do so as we roll it out. In terms of the design of the scheme, we did that in collaboration with the Department of Justice and with the Victims Payment Board. And we also had extensive conversations with the representative groups from the victims of the Troubles/conflict over the last few months. And I'd very much like to say thank you to those groups for the way that they've engaged with us. That's been incredibly helpful. In designing the scheme, we also looked at similar schemes from across the world to ensure that we took the best practice from them. And we had input from leading academics from universities in Northern Ireland and also from further afield, such as Harvard University in the States. And the outputs from that, we believe, is a scheme that is compliant with the regulations, which is sympathetic, inclusive and easy to access. So where are we today? Well, I'm very pleased to be able to say that this week we've received the first cases from the department for our team to look at. And those cases will be looked at by our team of assessors. And those assessors are public servants who've chosen to come and work with Capita, typically from the NHS. And they bring their professional background and professional qualifications to the scheme. And we've also put them through some pretty intensive specialised training to make sure that they're fully equipped to support those in need. Now that the scheme is up and running, we're very clear that that ongoing transparency and governance is important, as I mentioned earlier. And to that end, I think the committee in July talked about the possibility of an external review of the scheme. We would very, very much welcome that. In our experience, these external reviews have been really good at identifying areas for improvement and indeed reinforcing best practice. So if the committee do decide they would like to progress an external review, we would give it our full support. And I'd like to just close these opening remarks by saying that this scheme obviously cannot reverse the trauma and upset and the pain that's been caused by the troubles and the conflict over the recent years. But what it can do, to some extent, is through the financial recognition, help to alleviate some of that suffering. Our job is to play a really important part in the scheme, and you have my word to the committee that we will make sure that we help support get to those who need it most. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Antony, and we do welcome the fact that you have given an indication that you'll be willing to return and continue to engage with this committee. I think given the issue that sadly has brought about the need for this pension provision, this payment scheme, underscores the sensitivity, underscores the hurt, the pain, the anguish of years of unnecessary violence and trouble in our country. So, on that point, what assurance can you give us today that the sensitivity with which the applicants have engaged with this process, their past, the worry, as Judge McAlinden made reference to yesterday, about ensuring that even an issue like a meeting with applicants is done in a sensitive way as to location, as to where that would be held. Can you give us that assurance that that same sense of sensitivity will prevail in the staff that will deal with and process these assessments? Because we are not, and I have been at pains to state, this is not a read over between this scheme and any other scheme. Other schemes are for other committees and for others to probe and ask questions about how they were or weren't successful. This is a new scheme, and we want to ensure collectively, both the executive committee, this committee, the department, and the panel and everybody involved, and I suspect yourselves, to ensure that this works to the best possible standard.
I completely agree, Mr. Chairperson, and I'm very happy to give that assurance that we will do everything we can to make sure that we deal with all the cases, all the individuals with great sensitivity. In terms of the detail, I'll let Brendan in a moment pick up if that's okay.
Okay.
But we have got some quite significant safeguards in the system and checks and balances and the training that I mentioned earlier. So we've got the specialist training, we have the really sensitive approach that we're going to use in terms of choosing the method of assessment, which will, where possible, be through using medical evidence directly from other parts of the NHS. And during any face-to-face meeting, we would absolutely encourage any applicant, any person to bring along a companion to help them go through the process. But if you're okay, Mr. Chairperson, I'll just let Brendan fill in some of the detail.
Thank you, Antony.
Okay, Brendan.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Yes, we acknowledge that this is an exceptionally sensitive time for people who are applying to the scheme. We're acutely aware that not only do we have to ensure that as many of the applications that come to us as possible are done as a paper-based assessment, alleviating the need for any face-to-face consultations, and that'll be our primary goal, really, to make sure that we can complete as many as possible using a paper-based assessment approach, as Antony mentioned. Where as a last resort we need to meet with people on a face-to-face basis, we'll seek to do that in the most appropriate location. So that'll either be in their home or potentially in one of our assessment centres. And as part of that process of determining the correct location, one of our clinical assessors will review the entire case. And things like location, we appreciate are really important. So the last thing we want to do, for instance, is ask someone to travel to a location that may take them past the place where an incident occurred. So we've built those safeguards into the process. The staff that we're employing on this are all healthcare professionals. They're absolutely dedicated to and wedded to the principles of the scheme. And as part of the training that Antony mentioned, we've engaged with Wave Trauma, and they've designed and have delivered it's a really intense 10-hour trauma awareness session. It's broke over 4 sessions throughout the 4 weeks of training. So we're really keeping that at the centre of what we do. We really genuinely care about the individuals who are coming through the process. And I believe the safeguards are there, and we'd be happy to provide any further detail that might be needed for your reassurance.
If I can also, just add a little bit, Mr. Chairman, as head of the clinical team, we have also within this scheme, within the team, we have recruited psychiatric specialists and specialist medical advisors who have background in disability assessment medicine. And the same principles, if you go to an NHS hospital and there's a complicated or complex case, they undertake multidisciplinary team meeting, they call it MDT. On the same principle, we have established an MDT team within our team who would be helping the clinical assessors and their managers in discussing any complex cases in order to make sure that the applicant gets absolutely the correct outcome from their assessment.
Okay, just on the point of the assessors, before I go to members have now indicated, so we'll go to members' questions, but from the correspondence we noticed that there was an assessment by the clinical assessors for a practical and a written process or assessment. What was the pass rate of that in terms of those who took part in that?
I can answer that, Antony. Yeah. So Mr. Chairman, we've just seen the first 2 cohorts of trainees come out of training last week. I'm pleased to say that of the 14 staff who came into the process, only 1 fell by the wayside throughout the training process. So they've all passed through the training successfully. The feedback that we received, and I'm sure we've shared this feedback with the department and be more than happy to share it with yourselves. The feedback at the end of the training from those trainees was a real credit to the team that have designed and delivered the training. To give you an example, one of the comments was, "This is the best training I've had throughout my nursing career." And the other comments from the other trainees were of a very similar nature. So I'm delighted to say that they've all made the grade. At this point, as they go through into completing the disability assessments, we will be auditing 100% of the cases that they write. We've made sure that we've trained them to the appropriate level, but we will continue to audit them for a period of at least 6 months. So even though they've passed out of training, they haven't really yet proven that they're at the standard that we require. Once they get to that standard, we will then implement a very structured rolling audit process. So we select a statistically valid sample of cases every month so that we can keep an eye on that and reassure everyone that quality is right at the top of our list.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to members and I'll try and relay these as I saw them. First of all, to Sinead Bradley. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the presentation so far. Chair, like others, I think one of my main concerns in this is the re-traumatising of victims. And with that measure, I'm delighted we're actually speaking about this today, and we've moved to this point in time where we are looking at the detail and talking about the recruitment and the training that's happened. And I have been reassured by some of the comments made about the level of, I suppose, understanding there is and the sensitivities around this. And I'd just be keen to know, in terms of the clinical assessors, when the applications are being sifted through, is there an attempt made to understand the applicant and their needs and perhaps match them to the most suitable clinical assessor that may carry a particular specialism or weight in an area, mindful of psychological trauma, etc. And added to that, I would also be keen to know, whilst great effort may be invested in making sure that those clinical assessors are at all times sensitive to the needs of the applicant and the victims, are there also training mechanisms in place for all of those people who will have a role in being in contact with the applicant? Because individual stories may carry significant dates or times in the year where things are perhaps difficult to manage, or the applicant may be having a difficult period, and it would be remiss of somebody in an admin role, for example, to simply send out an appointment on a date that should have been penciled out or reserved as being a good date not to contact a victim. So I really want to know the level of consideration that has been given to truly understand the applicants and the weight of the I suppose trauma that they may be carrying. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead.
So I'll just reply initially, then I'll just hand over to Shah to talk about the clinical training, if that's okay. I completely understand and share the concern. If we start re-traumatising people as a result of this scheme, then we really are failing in our jobs. So I can promise that we are very, very aware of this. In terms of some of the training point, all of our recruits have a degree of mental health experience, which I think is absolutely important. And then we will have training for our wider staff as well. But if you're okay, Shah, please.
Thank you, Member. In terms of the re-traumatization, one of the things that in this scheme that Capita will not be doing will be making diagnoses of psychiatric conditions. And it is usually from the diagnostic point of view where the consultant or the specialist or the doctor will go into more depth about how they sustained the trauma, what actually happened, and that might bring more memories or bad memories of that time back. What we are concerned with, we will be working on a working diagnosis, which has already been provided to us by the specialist with the claim that the applicant submits. If that diagnosis is not available, in the process embedded what we call it initial review, our assessors will be going to all the contexts, clinical context that's been provided by the applicant to go and seek that diagnosis. And once we get that information and that diagnosis is available to us, our priority number one is to undertake a paper-based assessment, so the claimant will not have to come into contact with the assessor or they have to go through any of the re-traumatization. In terms of if we need to do a face-to-face assessment, whether that's in the clinic or whether that's at home or whether that's virtual via video or whether that's via telephonic consultation, the clinical assessor will be aware of any risks or any safeguards that is required for that applicant. What we have embedded in the training is absolutely, the interpersonal skills, the sensitivity that these assessors will be showing, the empathy, because they all come from a clinical background, as my colleague Antony mentioned. Most of them will have background experience in mental health. Those who do not have experience in mental health to that extent, our training covers really well, all the conditions that these applicants are likely to have been suffering from, whether you name it, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it is all covered in the training. So the risk of re-traumatization, our aim is to make it, to very, very minimal, because the case assessor is not, the clinical assessor is not required to talk specifically about the incident itself, but rather the diagnosis they have, the symptom they get, and how it is having an impact on their day-to-day life, to enable the clinical assessor to reach to a level, degree of disablement that they can advise and complete a robust report for the victim payment board so that they can make that decision.
And Ms Bradley, if I could just come in with a couple of answers to some of the other points that you've made. In terms of the individual applications coming in, they'll be allocated to a clinical assessor who will look at the case and consider all of the information that's available. If there are healthcare professionals who've been involved in the care of the applicant and we don't have evidence from that individual healthcare practitioner, we will reach out to them. So we've committed to the President of the Board, if we have the contact details for other healthcare professionals, we will reach out to them to gather evidence. So we'll make sure that we've got as much evidence as possible available to us before we make any decisions about the case. The clinical assessor will then determine the best route to assess that individual's disability. We are aiming to do the vast majority of those on paper. Where we do need to see an individual face-to-face, as we mentioned, there are safeguards in place. And the clinical assessors aren't on their own. They're not just left with these cases to determine for themselves. There's a senior clinical governance team under Dr. Shah. They'll provide coaching and mentoring. So if somebody has a particularly difficult, complex case, it could be complex physical and complex psychological difficulties the applicant has expressed, they can go to the senior clinical governance team. And if the senior clinical governance team need any further support on it, we've established this multidisciplinary senior clinical panel, which is senior psychiatrists, psychotherapists, a broad range of disability medicine specialists who will form this senior clinical panel. So we believe there are lots of safeguards in place. We've worked very closely collaborating with academics and clinicians in the trauma space to be acutely aware of the difficult trauma that people have experienced. So again, hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we've got very robust processes in place. And
Brendan, can you just comment briefly on the admin staff training?
Yes, so we, as part of the service that we'll provide, we've established an inquiry centre so we can support applicants who may need to know where their case is, where we might need to see someone on a face-to-face basis. They might need to call us to say, this is a particularly sensitive date, this is a sensitive time, I'm uncomfortable in that location. So we've established a team of some of our experienced inquiry centre agents, and they also will receive training in trauma awareness, so we can be very sensitive about how we handle those telephone calls, and as you rightly say, those interactions with people who may well be feeling vulnerable and anxious as they go through the application process.
Thank you. Just on one final point, if I might. In terms of the applicants, some of these applicants may have had previous connections with Capita, and in particular there I'm referencing that they have been through assessments, and we all know very well the stories that have been about in terms of the assessment not being reflected in the report. And I just would be curious to know if an applicant did feel the need or felt reassured by the fact that they could record the assessment if there had to be a face-to-face, would there be any objection from the clinical assessor to that recording happening?
So at the moment, the recording is not part of the scheme, but we are discussing that with the Department of Justice. But we are encouraging everybody to bring a companion in the event that they need to have a face-to-face assessment. So whilst the recording isn't currently available to them, we would make sure that everybody is there and they can provide that level of reassurance that the assessment is reflected in the report.
Sorry, when you said, I don't mean Capita making the recording available. I'm saying if the applicant chose to record, what's the advice given to clinical assessors to proceed with the face-to-face?
Brendan, do you mind just answering that directly?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Ms Bradley, that as Antony says, it's a matter that we're discussing with the Department of Justice. What we'd say on that is there's an element of balance in that. Typically with these type of things, you're looking to get a recording which is a master version which can be shared with both parties. We don't have agreements or a process in place for that yet. We're not instructing our staff one way or the other. So it really is an individual preference for the clinical assessors. If they felt uncomfortable being recorded, then hopefully their wishes not to be recorded would be respected. But I think the key thing is we are in conversation with the department about it. There are some sensitivities we think around data protection in this area, and we're committed to getting a solution in place with the department.
Thank you, and thank you. Just if I could just put a note, my prime concern would be for the applicant feeling comfortable. The clinical assessor is there in a professional capacity, and therefore I think their whole focus should be on making everything about that face-to-face as comfortable and safe for the applicant. But thank you for your answers so far. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sinead. And the Deputy Chair, Sinead. It's frozen.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, we can, Sinead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Antony, Brenton, and Shah. The note we received in our pack was very useful, I have to say, and a lot of what I had intended to tease out has already been answered in your previous question and answer session there. So it was really just to double check. So what you're saying is, in the first instance, the Capita healthcare professionals will accept support letters from a person's, a clinical psychologist or counsellors, confirming that the applicant does have a PTSD diagnosis in relation to a conflict-related trauma. You're saying that will be acceptable in the first instance by Capita?
Yes, that's right. Our last resort almost is to do a face-to-face assessment. We absolutely want to try and do, as we said previously, the majority of assessments through using medical evidence, phone calls to healthcare professionals and so on. So yes, that is the case.
And just how will you manage the fact that a number of the applicants will have physical and psychological injuries, probably dating back to the 60s and 70s? So what will be deemed acceptable evidence there if there's difficulties for them to get, to acquire their medical records from that period?
Yes, that is absolutely a challenge that we've had to consider in the design of the scheme. And again, do you mind if I just ask Brendan to pick up the detail? Yes,
we acknowledge the fact that a lot of the people who are applying to the scheme may have been injured a long time ago. And it's essential that we're able to help them and facilitate their application into the scheme. To support that, we've been in conversations with the Department of Health, the BMA GP Council, about access to medical records. And we acknowledge that maybe the standard of recording of injuries has changed over time. So there may be very good detailed evidence in more recent files, but as you say, if you go back to the late 60s, early 70s, there may be sparse information. So we recognise that is a challenge we need to work to overcome. What we have been able to do, you mentioned the diagnosis piece. So diagnosis is really important to the scheme, and I'll maybe ask Dr. Shah just to touch on it in a moment. But in layman's terms, I'm not a clinician, but in layman's terms, the clinical assessors have to identify the injury. And in order to do that, particularly in psychological cases, we need a diagnosis. So that could be a formal diagnosis from a consultant psychiatrist or a consultant clinical psychologist. And that would be very formal, clearly evidenced in the medical records. However, we recognise that a lot of people who've been injured in troubles and conflict may not have had access to that level of care. So we've agreed with the president of the board that we could use a working diagnosis which could have been identified by another healthcare professional who's been involved in the care of that injured individual. That's probably a good point for me to hand over to Dr. Shah to maybe help you understand what a working diagnosis is and how we'll identify it.
Yeah, so absolutely. When there's a historic, for example, if you go back into 60s and 70s and somebody, perhaps, if I just give an example, that they suffered depression as a result of the trouble-related incident, and they went to see their GP, and the GP thought, well, your symptoms are suggestive of depression or, another psychiatric condition, but it's not confirmed. However, I'll start treating you with antidepressants. So that's their working diagnosis they're working towards. And that medication, when they started to take, actually make them feel better or actually help them. And from that point onward, they didn't really sought any more help or anything, but they continue to take the medication. So if we get that degree of information from the GP records, that would be sufficient for us in order to work on that and accept that as a diagnosed condition and then process the assessment further.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very useful because you actually had answered my next question just in terms of the evidence threshold and what level would be required. But no, that's very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sinead. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your attendance today. Obviously, there's been quite a lot covered already, and I appreciate the Chair stated at the start about not having a read across from one payment scheme to another. However, I think this is naturally going to happen given the public interest in PIP. So I just have a number of questions just sort of stemming on from the process and also in terms of answers that you've given to other committee members. The first one is on the ability to bring a companion to assessments, which I fully appreciate. But I'm just wondering if you could give us a guarantee that companions will be allowed, let's say if there was in an assessment centre or even indeed in somebody's living room, should that be their preferred place, that they will actually be allowed in. Because I've personally had experience where I've been told to sit outside because there wasn't enough chairs for a different assessment. And just also on the companion, will the applicant have to nominate on a form and give a heads up to Capita that somebody else will be there, or will that be accepted on the day?
So I can give the assurance that the companions will be accepted under any circumstances. And I apologise if you've had a different experience on a different benefit. That's not good. I'm happy to look into that if you want to talk to me about it outside of the meeting. In terms of the application process, again, it's just a level of detail, so I'll just pass over to Brendan, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Ms Woods, for your question. In relation to companions, absolutely, we encourage all applicants to get support and bring companions with them. As part of the scheme, and I should say this scheme is unique and novel. It's entirely different to any other scheme. It's founded on different regulations, different principles, different purpose. And we're acutely aware of the sensitive nature of the scheme and that people have already been traumatised enough, and we definitely don't want to add to that. So we encourage that companions come along. There's no need to notify us in advance of the name of a companion. Potentially the only exception to that is where we might do a telephone assessment, or we could do a virtual assessment, much like the Starleaf system that we're doing now. Again, those solutions are all in place. The department's encouraged us to make those other methods available. And just to facilitate being able to get a companion joined on a call or joined on a video call, we would welcome getting the contact details in advance. But again, we'll have an inquiry centre, so if anyone has any concerns, we'd encourage them just to give us a call. We'd be more than happy to facilitate, change appointment times, change locations, change the method of assessment if somebody's uncomfortable with what's being proposed. So this is really about putting the victims at the centre of what we're trying to do and give them control over how the assessment process operates.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that answer. In terms of the medical evidence and sort of maybe current evidence that, say, GPs or other healthcare professionals may hold on an applicant, do the healthcare professionals have to provide evidence to Capita? Are they mandated to do so? It's just in terms of, obviously, again, and I'm trying maybe comparing apples with oranges here, but the GPFR forms, is that going to be the similar kind of process of how medical information is requested?
I don't believe we can compel them. Brendan?
Can I take this?
Well, if I could just first of all, Shah, this was that the board does have the power within the regulations to compel individuals and organisations to provide evidence. I don't think we will be relying on that. That there is a medical factual report form which has been designed, and I'm maybe stealing Dr. Shah's point here, but Dr. Shah's team have developed a medical factual report which is different to what you would have seen in other benefits. As we say, this is a very different scheme. It provides for very targeted questions. We've worked directly with the GP Council in Northern Ireland, who've been amazing in facilitating us. They've helped to design this form. And indeed, today we were in communication with the GP Council about sending out some further correspondence to the 330 or so GP surgeries in Northern Ireland. So we're working really closely with them. We're encouraging them to complete these forms and get them back into us. And finally, just one more point on it. Anyone who's applying, we'd encourage them to send in any evidence they already have. Please don't go to your GP. Please don't go to the hospital. If you've got evidence in your possession, please send it in to us. And also send us in the contact details for people who've been involved in your care. We assure you, we guarantee that we will reach out to those healthcare professionals and we'll attempt to obtain that information on your behalf. So please don't worry. If you don't have it, just give us the contact details and we'll look after that for you. And sorry, Dr. Shah.
No, I think you've explained it really well. I just wanted to reiterate that the medical factual report that we have on this scheme is very specific, to the needs of the applicant, and it asks specific questions which will have our clinical assessors in order to identify the injury, identify the diagnosis, identify the restriction if they answer all the questions. So it will enable us to write more and more paper-based assessments.
Thank you very much. We all appreciate that. It was very, very good and very clear answer in terms of the process. Finally, from me, Chair, and it was just in relation to the briefing note that was supplied to the committee, and thank you for that. It was very detailed. There was a note that throughout the application process, clinical assessors will be required to determine the percentage of permanent disablement. It sort of raised a number of questions for us in terms of how does one calculate a percentage? And does this mean that the disablement scheme will essentially be a bit of a point scoring in terms of actual percentages asked for? And does, if it is based on number percentage, does that determine then eligibility? Is that a direct reader across for certain, so 68% to a certain payment? How does that kind of work? And is there any precedent existing for assessments such as this in terms of permanent percentage of permanent disability?
Brendan, are you okay?
Yes, thank you again, Ms Woods. This is a very, very complex area, and I'll do my best to try to simplify it. The regulations do require that the clinical assessors provide the board with a very robust, clearly justified report on the percentage of permanent disablement attributable to a troubles-related injury. The regulations are quite detailed in how that must be done, and as you say, the disability must be expressed in a percentage. The percentage must be a multiple of 10. So simple mathematical rounding. If it's 5 or above, it is the next highest multiple of 10. With the exception of any disability which is below 14%, or 14% and above, sorry, 14% becomes 20. The threshold for entitlement is 14%, which will be expressed as 20. You're quite right to point out that that is quite complex. The regulations point to a table of prescribed disabilities. It's a table that appears in the Social Security and Benefits Act 1982. That's called up in the regulations. That provides quite a detailed table of percentage disability for certain types of physical injury. It's quite detailed. Encourage anyone who's involved in the scheme, take a quite quick look at it to get a feeling of how percentage disability is built up. What that table and the Social Security Act 82 doesn't include is psychological injury. So there is no table for psychological injury. And in preparing for this scheme, in our very early conversations around the scheme, that was one of our major areas of focus. And it was an area that was flagged by the victims groups. VSS provided us with a very detailed paper which they'd put together with the victims sector, which really expressed their concerns around psychological disability and how it would be determined in percentage. We then engaged with leading academics from Queen's, Ulster University, Harvard University, as Antony has mentioned, our own very senior clinical team within Capita, including Dr. Shah and our senior medical officer. And we put together a detailed literature review which looked at all similar, or very many similar schemes across the world where people had suffered traumatic injuries. As a part of that process and working particularly with Queen's, a very detailed psychological framework has been devised which helps clinicians understand how certain disabilities caused by psychological injury can express themselves. Again, it's very complex and I'm not a clinician, so I'm maybe just going to ask Dr. Shah to just talk a little bit about the psychological injury framework and how that is used in the assessment process.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, so as Brandon mentioned, we worked with the specialists in this field and people with background experience in disability assessment medicine. This psychological assessment framework, it evaluates the level of disablement by taking into consideration, number one, the diagnosis, the severity, the symptoms that these applicants are suffering from, and also the impact it has on their social life, on their occupational health, and their day-to-day activities, so it's all taken into consideration, and then the findings that the clinical assessor will have at the time of assessment, whether it's mental state examination finding, cognitive state examination finding, they will combine all these together and then put them on the scale which is defined in the psychological assessment framework, and then that will determine as to whether the person is 20% disabled or 30% disabled, and so that's how it's going to work.
Thank you both. I know Chair said that was me, but it's you'll always get another one from me. Just following on from that, then, is it and sort of related to it? Is the percentage disablement, so it's expressed in multiples of 10? Does that directly correlate then to the amount paid? And finally, is there an appeals process?
So there is definitely an appeals process in terms of the correlation, Brendan?
Yes, I believe so within the regulations, though. I should point out, Ms Woods, that we are not involved in determining the level of payment. We simply provide the report that gives the degree of disability. As I say, it is a very complex area. We recognise that there are going to be many people who have both physical and psychological injuries, and the clinical assessors have to be able to determine what level of those is attributable to either a single or multiple troubles-related incidents. It's made even slightly more complex because people may have had other pre-existing or post conditions. So this is a really complex area for us to get into the detail of. We believe we've got a really competent, capable team. We've got the ability to do this very well. we're giving the clinical assessors the space to really work through these cases in detail. And we're looking for support from everyone here. We want to continue to engage with the victim sector. As Antony said, we'd really welcome conversations with yourselves as the scheme proceeds, particularly if you've got any concerns, if there are things that you want clarified or points you'd like to raise with us, please reach out to us. We'd really appreciate the input.
Can I just add on the appeals piece? Yes, there is an option for the applicants to appeal against, if they're not happy with it. But even before that, when the clinical assessor completes the report, it goes through vigorous audit process internally, quality assurance process. And when the report is submitted to the Victim Payment Board, the board themselves, if a panel member thinks that they are not happy with the content of the report or they have concerns about the quality of the report, they can send that report back into our space, and we, our senior clinical team will have the opportunity to look into that report for them and respond back to them. So they, before the applicants appeal, there is this process embedded as well.
So I think in
Thank
some...
you very much for your attendance and answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Just on that point, Dr. Shah, is the report before it's submitted to the Payments Board, in all circumstances or in some, would it be shared with the applicant?
So the applicant can request a copy of the report from the Victim Payment Board itself. So when we complete the report, we will submit it to the board itself.
To the board,
yes.
Right. But at that stage, the applicant could apply for sight of the report.
Yes, once they make their decision, yes, they can apply.
Doug, next.
Thank you, Chair, and Antony, Brendan, Shah, thank you. I mean, it's a complicated piece of work that you've got to do, and I accept that. And we've talked a lot about the applicants. Can I just ask a couple of questions on process, please? Can I get a sense from you? It probably falls with you, Brendan, but can I get a sense of you, please, of who the clinical assessors are? I want to say, who are they? Where are they from? I get that they've got a particular background, but where are they coming from, and how many of them are there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Beattie. Happy to answer your question. So at the moment, we've, as I mentioned to Mr. Chairman, we've currently recruited the first two cohorts of clinical assessors, so there are 14. We actually have a total of 34 clinical assessors who have been offered and accepted roles with us, and they'll be going through training cohorts over the coming weeks. We are looking forward into next year in terms of recruitment. A slight side point, obviously, we're working on forecasts which have been provided by the Government Actuaries Department. There's a low-level forecast, mid-range forecast, and a higher-level forecast. And at the moment, we're recruiting towards the higher end of the forecast. Now, we're keeping that under review on a fortnightly basis with the department, because obviously we don't want to over-recruit. But at the moment, there isn't great certainty around the volume of applications. In terms of the location, predominantly Northern Ireland, so our staff are predominantly based in Northern Ireland, but we recognise that there are victims who may have been injured elsewhere in the UK, may have been injured in Northern Ireland, but are resident elsewhere in the UK now. So we actually have a very good geographic dispersal, north-south within GB. We also acknowledge that there are going to be applications from outside of the UK. We're working very closely. We'll be looking at those on a case-by-case basis, but we have been able to establish that we'll be able to do virtual or telephone-based assessments for anyone in the EU. So we'll be able to do that via telephone or, as I say, video link. But outside of that, I think I'm aware there's at least applications in from as far afield as Canada at the moment. We need to look at the information governance processes around how we facilitate those. But I assure you, we're dealing with those on a case-by-case basis.
And thank you for that, Brendan. I mean, you've kind of answered partly of where I was going with this, and that was how do we make sure that the clinical assessors understand the very different societal issues that we have from an applicant who is in Northern Ireland and an applicant who may well be in England or further afield? Because the societal issues are very different from an applicant here than it will be in England, I suppose. And bearing that in mind, and that the huge level of mental distress that some of the applicants may well have in regards to who they talk to. Some of our applicants, for example, would be weary of talking to a GP because they don't know their background. Could you maybe, and if I missed this, apologies, could you just outline the vetting process for the assessors? Is it just an access NI, or what happens further afield on that?
No, thank you again. Another important point. So primarily the staff in the clinical assessor's role are all registered healthcare professionals. They'll have to maintain their registration with their governing body throughout their period of employment in providing clinical assessments. Before they can come into Capita, they have to go through baseline security vetting, as you mentioned. They then have to pass CTC clearance. So everyone will be CTC cleared. And we're acutely aware of the sensitivities around this and some of the different populations of people who will be applying to the scheme. And to give you an example, I met with the Chief Executive of the RUC PSNI Benevolent Fund earlier this week. He was very clear in expressing to us the concerns that he has for the population of people that he represents. And as you say, potential issues around trust, concern around who has access to their information and evidence. So I assure you we've got very good processes in place first of all with the department about what information comes into our space. So we really only want to know about information that helps us understand how somebody's disability affects them, as Dr. Shah says. We're less interested in how they were injured, unless it puts into context how their injury impacts them. So I can assure you that we're taking this very seriously. It's one of the principles of the scheme that personal data is handled very sensitively. So please be assured that we're committed to doing that.
Thank you. And the very fact that you've come back and said that all clinical assessors will be CTC'd, and I take it all the senior clinical governance team will be CTC'd or DV'd in some shape or form, and you can answer that. But there was a question asked about the appeals process, and I accept there will be an appeals process. But how does an applicant go about an appeals process? So, for example, if I'm looking at your high-level applicant's journey, and after, say, the process 3 on that applicant journey, that the applicant feels he's got an issue that he doesn't think that things are going right, or he hasn't given the information, what does he actually do to appeal, to sort of either re-engage or restart the process, or appeal what's been done so far?
Yes. So in terms of CTC clearance, yes, you're absolutely right. Everyone who has access to personal data will be CTC cleared. I personally won't have access to personal data, but I am also CTC cleared. And anyone in our operation who reports into me will also be CTC cleared. So that would include people who provide IT support. They don't directly have access to the personal data, but potentially could. So they don't need to as part of their job, but everyone who has access will be CTC cleared. In terms of the appeals process, again, need to make it really clear the appeals process is for the board and not for Capita. So I'm sure the President will advise you that he sees that he is judicially independent on this. The regulations, to the best of my memory, say that after the board has made their determination and notified the applicant of the outcome, there is a period of 12 months. And I'll correct that, Mr. Chairman, if I'm incorrect, but I think there's a period of 12 months during which the applicant can make an appeal to the board. So it's the board that will establish an appeals panel under the guidance of the President, and they'll make a determination about how to proceed. And they could request that there's a second healthcare assessment takes place, or they could just determine the appeal based on the evidence they have in front of them. But really is a matter for the board.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just, Doug, for all our information, because I I decided to look out the regulations and the legalities of all of this. What is very useful is Part 7 of the legislation, which sets out the assessment where disablement worsens, the appeals process, the determinations of the appeals, the time scale and so on. So that's very useful in terms of the context in relation to appeals, which undoubtedly will become an issue. One question before I go to Gemma and then to Robin is Sinead, I think, had a question that was around how long the applicant journey should take from minimum to maximum.
That's a tricky one to answer. We have some...
Sinead normally asks tricky questions. So.
I think it's tricky because we are very much dealing with these on a case-by-case basis to make sure we get it right. We do have some targets in the work that we're doing on our side, which Brendan can give more detail about. So we probably can give broad ranges, but it's very much on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we've got all the available evidence and make the right decision.
Yes, I think Antony's right to point out there are some particular challenges. Again, one of the principles of the scheme is that the board should make its determination without delay, and we're conscious of that. At this point, what we don't really know is what the quality of the applications will be like. So will applications come in fully formed with all the detail that's needed to determine the percentage of disability? Or will we have to go out to request further evidence from other healthcare professionals? We don't have a sense of that at this point. So what we do recognise is some cases will be done fairly quickly because, again, we're working very closely with the victims sector, and we're talking to them more or less on a weekly basis about what is good supporting evidence and how to present the applications in so they can be processed quickly. We're also aware that there are individuals, and we think we're seeing some of those come in now, who've put together their application by themselves without any support. They're maybe not as detailed as we would like. They don't have enough information for us to be able to give the board a robust report. They're probably going to take us a bit longer, but we will work through them on an individual basis. The only other thing I would add to that is the board has the ability to prioritise certain cases. So based on age, based on whether somebody's terminally ill, and we've committed to processing those cases as a priority. So that may lead to some other cases taking a little bit longer. So apologies, that's a bit of a vague answer, but at this point, all I can say is we're committed to processing the cases without delay, and that quality is our primary goal. Sorry, Antony.
It's probably a very good question that we'd be very happy to come back and talk to you about as the scheme progresses, because it certainly will become clearer as we get more applications in.
Gemma?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel. You'll be glad to know one of my questions was actually that question, so you don't need to answer that again. My other question, and my only other question is, will there be a limit on how many assessments the Capita's healthcare professionals can carry out in one day, or is there a target that they have to meet in assessments in which they have to carry out in a day?
Well, we don't have a firm target, but we've obviously got to base the scheme on some sort of volumetrics, and we've assumed one assessment per day at the moment, but we'll keep that under review as the scheme progresses.
Okay, that's fair enough. And that's all my answers, or all my questions, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Gemma. And Robin.
Chair, thank the members for coming, but Doug Beattie asked my question around the appeals process, which certainly sounds fine at this moment in time. And secondly, I suppose it was really around the final question there from Sinead, so I'm content at this stage, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just conclude by maybe seeking just a bit of clarification from yourselves in relation to how are yourselves clear in relation to the accountability within your own organisation to deliver the contract, and are Capita clear on who is ultimately responsible at a departmental level? Because one of the issues, and we want to be open and transparent with yourselves, as I believe you have been with us in prior to this meeting and today. I do very much welcome your commitment to continuing to engage with us, because I think we have given a commitment to victims' organisations that we will, in our public role and our legal responsibilities as a statutory committee of this House, do all that we can to be of help and assistance. But one of the issues that we have had, and we've tried to tease it out, and I think yesterday the meeting with Judge McAlinden did help us to get an understanding of the role of the Executive Committee and the role of ourselves as a Justice Committee. But in terms of the delivery of the contract that you have, you're very clear that that is a contract with the Department of Justice or the Executive Office, or where do you see that that sits?
With the Department
of Justice.
Of Justice,
yeah, absolutely.
I think if I could just add to that, we are also aware of the sort of tripartite nature of arrangements around the scheme, but we're very clear contractually we are accountable to the Department of Justice. We're also under no doubt whatsoever that the President of the Board is scrutinising every step we take, and as with the Board being an arm's length body of the Executive Office, obviously there's a line in there. And ultimately, of course, we're accountable to the victims of the Troubles, and we want to make sure we get this scheme delivered properly for them.
Thank you for your attendance today, and on that note, I think it's an appropriate note to end that at the centre of this are those who have been affected by the past and the actions of others in relation to our past. So we want to ensure that they are kept at the centre of all that we do in relation to this. And I do welcome, and we will take you up on the point in regards to a continued engagement. And if there are any further queries or questions, Brendan, we will undoubtedly come back to you as a local point. But can I also thank Antony and Dr. Shah for coming over to Northern Ireland to be present here today, and for the time that you have given in relation to your presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, if there's no other issues following on from that, if anybody could indicate, I think we're okay to move on. That brings us then to the item 5, which is the Troubles, again in relation to the scheme. We have officials from the department who are joining us, and they're joined by Starleaf. So we have Dr. David Lennox, the Deputy Director of the Corporate Engagement and Communications at the department, Paul Bullock, who's the Secretary to the board, who was present with us yesterday, Gareth Johnston, the Acting Director of Strategic Policy, Quality and Good Relations at the Executive Office. We welcome them to the meeting. If we can, yes, I do see them now present. Thank you. Maybe David, do you want to make a few comments, and then members, if there are any specific questions, we just go straight to those questions. But David, if you want to maybe just so for your information, you'll be aware of this probably anyway. I'm sure that Paul has given you a readout of yesterday's meeting, and I have to say, as chair and for those who are present, I was, to say the least, very convinced that the judge, that the president of the board, Judge McAlinden, is taking a very, very keen interest. And you may have heard the comments from the representatives from Capita, that they are equally aware of the interest that Judge McAlinden is taking in this. And I have to say, that gives us all an assurance that, as best as we possibly can, that this process is going to have its focus in the right place and will hopefully give us the outcomes that we want in relation to those who make their application to this scheme. So, David, if you want to make a few comments.
Listen, thank you, Chair. And I just want to make a few opening remarks, if that's okay. I want to echo the comments you just made about Mr. Justice McAlinden. He's an incredibly busy man, but he has been absolutely, totally committed to this scheme from the outset. very generous with his time and advice and guidance, and has certainly led from the front. So I would echo all that you have said. As you noted, Paul is to my right, and you met with Paul yesterday. Paul is here representing the Victims Payments Board as Secretary. He can't speak on behalf of the Board, but obviously he'll say a few words, maybe shortly, just about a bit of an overview of the scheme and the number of applications that we are receiving. On my left then have Gareth Johnston from the Executive Office, as you've mentioned, and Gareth will say a wee bit more about the Executive Office's role as well, as was referred to earlier as a tripartite arrangement. So my role within the Department of Justice has been as the Project Director for putting in place the arrangements to implement the scheme. The project was headed up by Deborah Brown as its Senior Responsible Owner. As I said before, the government's arrangements are not straightforward by any stretch, but they're what are presented in the regulations, and so we are working with those. So we have worked very closely with others, both with the Mr. Justice McAlinden and with the colleagues in the Executive Office, as we have sought to implement the scheme. And I'm sure that Mr. Justice McAlinden reinforced the point about the independence of the board. So while the Department of Justice has responsibility for putting in place the administration arrangements, they have absolutely no responsibility in terms of decision making by the board. So just in terms of what we have achieved, the Department of Justice was designated by the Executive Office in August last year, formally designated in August, to put in place the necessary arrangements. So while some work had been started before by the Executive Office in anticipation, the work really started in earnest at that point when we established our project. So a lot has been achieved, I think, in a relatively short space of time, which allowed the scheme to open for applications on the 31st of August, which is, I have to say, a very important day in my view for victims and survivors of the Troubles. So you'll be aware of some of the things that have been done, but just very briefly, obviously we had to start with scratch. We established a project team, but since then we've had to build quite a substantial administration team from scratch, bearing in mind that there's a number of resourcing pressures across the NICS and some of the challenges, but also trying to train some of those staff and get them up to speed in the midst of the pandemic has presented its own challenges, but that has been achieved, and we continue to keep the resourcing of the team under review. Also, arrangements were put in place with a large number of organisations, because as Brendan has mentioned, not only in terms of the healthcare sector, but also organisations like PRONAE, the Police Service, Health and Social Care Trusts. There's relationships with those between and the board to gather information to help the assessment of applications. So to date, there's 20 information sharing agreements with individual organisations. Obviously, as well, work was done on the development of an application form, development of the guidance, also the online portal, which is now available to accept applications, and also then, obviously, we talked about the contract with Capita, which you've just heard, and that was a substantive piece of work which the department was able to expedite, and I have to say we have worked very closely with Capita, and certainly we have enabled them to be able to receive assessments this week, which is really positive. I want to say as well, before I turn now to Paul, that in my view this has been very a collegiate approach across a number of different bodies to get where we are, but none less so, I think, in terms of our engagement with the victims groups. I personally have valued that. That has been regular and very much valued their feedback. One of the key principles of the scheme is making sure that it's victim-centric, and certainly that has driven everything that we have sought to do collectively to put in place this scheme. I'm going to turn now to Paul, maybe just to say a few words maybe about numbers of applications to give you a kind of a sense of how that has picked up since the 31st of August.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, Chair, and it's good to see you again. I know we met yesterday, and you may have received some of this information yesterday, but I did get it updated as close of play last night. When the scheme opened on the 31st of August, applications were submitted to the scheme within an hour. I think we can safely say even within 15 minutes of the scheme opening, and that was online through the portal. As of close of play yesterday, 670 applications have now been submitted to the scheme. 433 of those applications were through the online portal, and 237 were on hard copy paper forms. The administration team has also been dealing with a large number of inquiries primarily from individuals seeking a paper copy of the application form and a few other general inquiries, which we've been able to help them out with. The team has also been busy starting to process the applications, but you'll understand it is a new team and it's a new scheme, and they're getting to grip with the process and procedures as we go along, and every day highlights something new for the team, but we have the team in place and it's a good learning experience, and we're getting through them as quickly as we can. I am pleased to report that following initial eligibility checks, as David said, the first applications have now been forwarded to Capita this week. We've had 3 applications passed on to Capita this week for them to begin the assessment of disablement. That's a positive move, but it's also important to note that the ability for us, for the board to forward applications to Capita depends very much on a number of checks. We have a number of checks that has to be carried out to verify applications, and sometimes there's gaps in applications where we have to maybe chase matters up on behalf of the applicant or the victim who's making the application. Another important point to note, and I think Capita colleagues already highlighted this, that approximately 10% of applications received to date are from outside Northern Ireland. One of the areas of interest to the board, the Victims Payment Board, is to ensure there is good awareness of the scheme, and that anyone who might be eligible to make an application is aware. So prior to the scheme opening, there was some 800 individuals and organisations who had expressed an interest. When the scheme opened, all these people were advised about the formal opening, and a number of communications also issued to a number of representative organisations, and of course the organisations representing victims and survivors. We've been engaging and continue to engage with them on a regular basis. So we are keeping the awareness of the scheme very much as a high level in our priorities, and I know I work closely with Mr Justice Michael Linden as President of the Board to see how we can maybe keep that awareness and maybe extend that awareness, just to make sure that anybody who might be eligible is aware of the scheme and of the processes for making an application. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Maybe Gareth, say a few words about the role of the Executive Office.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Chair. As David said, I'm currently Acting Deputy Secretary and Director of Strategic Policy, Equality and Good Relations in TEO. And in that role, I'm the Senior Responsible Owner for the scheme. David mentioned that in August last year, 2020, we designated the Department of Justice to take forward the administrative arrangements for the scheme on behalf of the Victims Payments Board. TEO still retains the overall sponsorship and financial responsibility for the scheme, and in that connection I wanted to say just a brief word about 3 aspects. First of all, about engagement with the victims and survivors sector. Second, about support for those who are bringing forward applications, and thirdly, about finance. In order to assist with the establishment of the scheme, we put in place a sectoral working group with representatives of the Commission for Victims and Survivors, the Victims and Survivors Service, and 4 of the victim support groups, and they were chosen on the basis that they were bodies who were already delivering welfare advice and support to victims and survivors. That group, which has been part of the formal programme structure for the implementation of the scheme, that group has met on a fortnightly basis in the lead up to the scheme opening, and is continuing to meet, and that's very important, as a forum for the groups to feed any issues on implementation to the scheme back to TEO, to the Department of Justice and to the board. Alongside the establishment of that group, we provided additional financial support to the Victims and Survivors Service. We did that in the last financial year, in the current one, and that will continue going forward. And that's to allow the victim support groups to recruit additional welfare officers to assist and to advise applicants to the scheme. It's important I acknowledge that that level of resource will be kept under review in the context of the demand for support through the groups. In terms then of the overall funding of the scheme, members will be aware that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister provided an undertaking to the court in April this year that payments will be made to those applicants deemed eligible for an award through the scheme. So anyone who applies to the scheme and makes a successful application doesn't need to worry where the money is coming from. The undertaking is that those payments will be made and will be made promptly when they fall due. There is, of course, still the very important wider question for those of us in TEO of where the executive obtains the funding for what is potentially a very expensive scheme, what is a scheme that was developed in Westminster and is a scheme that, as well as making payments to people here, will make payments to a substantial number of people outside of this jurisdiction. The Finance Minister has initiated the dispute resolution process as outlined in the Statement of Funding Policy, and he will continue to make representations to Treasury on behalf of the whole Executive in relation to the funding of the scheme. Overall, as David has alluded to, there's been a huge volume of work undertaken in a short space of time to allow the scheme to open for applications on the 31st of August just past, and I want to pay tribute to all of those in the sector and to colleagues in the Department of Justice who have worked so hard to get those arrangements in place. I also want to acknowledge the very positive working relationships that there have been between all of the key stakeholders, between the departments, the sectoral groups, Capita and others. It has been very good to see all of that develop, and it is very good to be part of that close working throughout the implementation period. Conscious, Chair, that that's just a very brief summary of some key points, but very happy to provide further detail if members have questions.
Okay, I just have one question, and then if members have any questions, if they indicate, and if not, then we'll move on. But it was really following on from the comments made, and maybe Paul, as he was present yesterday, will maybe give us some clarity or some sort of readout of the concerns that Judge McAlinden raised in relation to the Secretary of State. And I didn't pursue it at that stage any further. I thought that we would maybe revisit that. But Paul, could you maybe just clarify for us what you thought, or what are those concerns, and how will they be addressed in a way that is not in any way detrimental to the scheme?
Yes, Chair. Well, the concerns of Justice McAlinden as President of the Board is that the Board acts in an independent judicial capacity in administering this scheme and making determinations on applications. And he's very strongly of the view, as would be the Board itself, that independence cannot have any political interference. He's really working on the basis. There has been correspondence issued, I know, to the Secretary of State to try and clarify this matter, where the Secretary of State maybe has stated that he can intervene on decisions made by the Board. But I know Justice McAlinden is working on the basis that if the Secretary of State does want to intervene or challenge a decision that is made by the Board or made by him as President, that is taken through the courts by way of judicial review.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to members, and we've Sinead Bradley and then Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you raising that point about the Secretary of State. Just 3 quick points. I suppose I don't like to presume anything, and I've not read it anywhere. So in terms of the applications opening, which I was delighted to see on the 31st of August, I just want to ask the question, is there a closing date? And if not, is it then expected that the scheme would peter out? You know, naturally that all applicants will have learned of it. And secondly, is there I suppose for an expression, a marking system for the quality of the applications coming forward, so we can make an assessment on the added value of those organisations who are supporting applicants? Because I just wonder those two then would need to run in tandem with additional support in year going to those organisations, with the likelihood of anticipated applications going on for some time. And in that instance, have the Executive Office committed to financing those organisations going forward in the longer term? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'll take the first couple of questions there. With regard to the scheme, opening date and closing date, the scheme is open for 5 years, but for somebody to qualify for a back payment, you know, within the regulations, the applications have to be made within 3 years of the scheme. The second question about the scoring of applications, already I referred to in the opening remarks about you know, the team having to deal with maybe where there's gaps in evidence, but already we're receiving, there's a marked improvement for any applications that are coming through the victim sectoral support groups. So that's very evident even at a very early stage with only 670 applications through the door. So yes, we have as I said, we have a checklist. We have a number of things that we need to have completed. I think, as Justice Michael Linden referred to yesterday, it's not just if an application comes in through the door and it's incomplete or there's gaps, it's not just disregarded. The board and the administrative team that supports the board will take every step to try and chase that evidence, whether it's making contact with the applicant themselves or with maybe their representatives or the victims' organisation that might have supported them, or we have a number of ISAs in place where we will go and chase evidence before we would pass it even to the likes of the legal advisor and on to the board. So basically, so that application would be as complete and comprehensive as possible before we get that length.
Yes, I can add on support for applicants. The funding that the Executive Office has provided to date has given an additional resource of 14 full-time equivalent welfare staff in VSS funded organisations, as well as funding for additional administrative staff. That totalled £131,000 last financial year. This year the projection is almost £1 million that we'll be investing in that. There's provision there too for additional support services, wider than just services about people's applications, because we recognise that people come forward, they want to make an application, and as members of the committee have already acknowledged, that can be a very difficult process. It can be a process that risks traumatisation, and it's important that people have the holistic support, be that counselling, psychological therapies, other therapies, that emotional support that they might need. So we put additional funding against that. We are working on the basis that support will be available right through the lifetime of this scheme. Obviously, we will need to adjust that up and down according to demand. By the time we get to the fifth year, it might be that we need a smaller number of posts, but it will be important for that support to be available through the lifetime of the scheme, and we will certainly keep it under review.
Appreciate the clarity. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rachel.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for attending. Apologies, I wasn't able to make the meeting yesterday, so I feel like a lot of these things have probably been covered. But apologies if there was any overlap. Just quickly, in terms of, and I appreciate even when we were speaking to Capita, it's wrong to compare the PIP process and that sort of thing with what we're dealing with now. But in terms of the reports and the assessors' reports that we all know dealing with PIP, and there are a number of issues with, say, wording and language that have come through in terms of, we've seen it in the Radar report and in the McAvanagh report as well, and just from our own experiences, you know, it says, you have stated that you can do this, I have decided that you can or can't. Is that kind of language going to be used in the assessor's report, and then in the report then it's available to the applicant? Or is it going to be maybe produced in a bit of a more sensitive or different way?
If I could just start off the first point, thanks for that. In terms of the language of the reports, I suppose the time will tell, but I just want to make a couple of points. One is that certainly in our engagement as part of the contract development, at every stage of the process has been a strong emphasis on making sure this is victim-centric and doesn't re-traumatise, and in my view, language is a very important part of that. Secondly, when the application is returned to the board, to enable them to make an assessment around entitlement, bear in mind that the board is made up of medical members, lay members and legal members. So those are medically trained people, and they will obviously be able to bring their medical viewpoint to how the reports are drafted and prepared as well. And that's a potential feedback loop. And I have to say, Capita have been very keen, both in terms of engaging with the sector groups and engaging with the board going forward, that they have that feedback loop, so there's a kind of a learning process. So we wish to deal with that relatively early on. In terms of the process issue, Paul, about sharing the reports,
Yes, of course. Well, the board, one of the kind of principles behind it is about being transparent. And we had mentioned earlier on about the appeal process. So if I know the president of the board is very keen that whatever is shared with the board can also be shared with the applicant. So if we're issuing a determination, if the board arrives at their determination whether to allow an application and make a payment, or to that it doesn't meet the eligibility criteria and therefore there's no entitlement to payment, the applicant must be provided with all the relevant information that was before the board to enable them to make their decision, to enable the applicant to make an appeal and set out the clear grounds for that appeal.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that's much better in terms of just, having the information there and given to everybody's on the same page then. We're not having to run around asking what's been shown to who and who's had access to what, should that ever have to happen. In terms of, not trying to compare, but if there's any processes and procedures being built in or incorporated to account for like extenuating circumstances or urgency in some cases, for example, if there's a terminal diagnosis, is there anything been considered or implemented that would allow certain cases to be expedited?
The board is required to, within the regulations, to prioritise cases where a terminal illness has been identified and highlighted by the applicant, and they also may prioritise cases based on age, so that option is open to them. But obviously, the age one's slightly different. But in terms of the terminal illness, that will be dependent on what is offered up by the applicant in terms of the application form. But they have the scope to do that.
And just in addition to that, all the applications will be going through a legal advisor who works as part of the administration team to support the board. So if that legal advisor sees any maybe exceptional circumstances that maybe would warrant that the application should be prioritised, that can be put in front of the board, for consideration at that stage, and then if that needs to be, it can be kind of prioritised on the basis whatever the exceptional circumstances might be.
Thank you. It brings me on nicely to my last question, which is about the legal advisors. I seen on the website that the legal membership applications, is that the same as the legal advisor?
No, that's not. The legal, the one that's advertised on the website is for the legal members of the board, for the permanent, because we have interim members of the board at the minute who have been appointed for 18 months. With a possibility of an extension, and we're now moving to appoint permanent members for the board.
The legal advisors are all our members of staff who are there to support the administration of the team.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Robin?
Thank you, Chair. Thank David, Gareth and Paul for being in front of us today. I think I have now a fair degree of clarity. My question was around the application process and the quality of the initial application, where you were indicating that some of the initial applications really needed to be sought greater clarity. Can I just ask you in that term, are there individuals who make, or have there been individuals who have made an application without being supported by a welfare officer or however, a solicitor or however it was determined? And then if you find that the quality of the applicant's application is not of a standard, what's the process for going back in touch with the applicant?
Okay, on your first question, yes, there's been a mix of applications received from individuals who are going through the process solo themselves, and probably there's those who have been through the organisations who are funded to support applicants. There'll be other applications as well where we're not sure if they're being supported or not. It's not always clear, but as I did say, the ones that have that support through the organisations at the present, those applications are of a marked improvement in quality. With regard to going back, if we need to go back to the individual, it might not always be the case we need to go back to the individual, and we can maybe progress that with organisations who can provide information, who we have agreements in place with. But if we do need to go back to the individual to advise of any gaps that they can provide on their application, we can take the opportunity at that stage to signpost them towards the free services that are available. We can't mandate that they take that up, but we certainly will provide them with an information leaflet at that stage, which provides information on all the free services that are available to help them throughout the process if they desire to take that up.
Yeah, well, thank you. That does add a lot of clarity to it. I suppose you'd be, if you were a victim, you'd be daft not to take up a free service when it's being offered to you by professionals. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Can I just check, Gemma, have you a question? Yep, Gemma.
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Most of this has been covered. It was just around the engagement with victims groups. So I'm just wondering, how has the engagement been so far? And what's their view on the application and assessment processes? Are there any early indications of problems or difficulties from them?
Do you want to say on the specifics?
Well, on the specifics, I have to say engagement has been really positive. So as Gareth has mentioned, we have been engaging regularly with the representatives from the Victim Survivor Service, Commission for Victim Survivors, and the 4 main groups who are providing the support. So that was helpful as part of the development process, where we were able to share application forms with them in draft. They provided important feedback around language and so on, and around the guidance. Even since the scheme was opened, there's been a couple of things which have been really helpful. For example, Capita organised a couple of drop-in sessions, virtual drop-in sessions, where welfare advisors were able to come along and ask questions about, and that is, I think Brendan referred to earlier, it's more about advice on how they articulate some of the evidence, because particularly on the psychological side is a wee bit more challenging, and also we have been meeting with them regularly around just general feedback in the process. And Capita has committed as well, because I think that's where the main interest is now, to meet with the groups regularly on an ongoing basis, certainly for a number of months. And I think that's been welcomed by the welfare advisors, because I just wanted to add a comment that was made earlier about the welfare advisors. It's important to bear in mind that they're in a learning curve as well as the administration team is, so this is all new to them in terms of a new scheme. Fair enough, some of them have been involved early on as the scheme has been developed. Some are much more recently involved, so they're learning, and I think as they get on as part of taking more applicants through the process, they'll develop their skills as well.
I might add that it's important that we don't lose that going forward, and that we keep that feedback loop going, particularly through the early days of the scheme, but even into the longer term. And we're talking with the sector about, well, we're continuing those meetings, but we're talking also with the sector about how best we can do
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's really so thank you. And just one more question around this as well. Is it anticipated that maybe further on into the scheme that these groups might need extra resources in order to help the applicants?
We are certainly responsive to that. In fact, it's something we're talking to the Victims and Survivors Service at the moment, and through them to the groups, just to make sure that in light of the numbers of applications that are coming forward, that there is adequate resource there. So I've said all along to the sectoral group that while we have to be conscious of public money and all of that, this is a vital service, and we will certainly aim to be responsive to whatever needs emerge.
No, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, members. And can I think that concludes any questions we have in relation to this part. And can I just thank David, Paul and Gareth for their attendance today, and maybe just to say that we would value a continued engagement with the committee. As I said to the representatives from Capita, we gave a commitment to those organisations that we have met with previously that we would do all in our power to be here to scrutinise and ask questions. I have to say, to date, both the response of all involved has been a positive process, and we very much welcome the openness that there has been in this process to date since we have become engaged with it. So a word of appreciation to yourselves from both departments, and also representing the payment board in Paul's presence. So thank you for your attendance today, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I think that brings us to the end of that. Just so that you're aware, it's our intention to have in the pack next week the summary of the meeting that we had. I know Rachel said she wasn't able to be there as others were yesterday, so there'll be a summary of that report. And out of that, there may be some questions that we might want to put to Justice McAlinden, particularly around the issue in regards to the Secretary of State. But I think what we'll do is we'll wait until, if you're agreed, until we get that report. People will have the opportunity to read it, and then we can decide as a committee as to what it is we want to do, so that there are no gaps left in the accountability arrangements in relation to where this all goes. Agreed? Thank you. There's nobody indicating. Thank you. That brings us then, members, to item 6, which is the Damage and Investment Bill, the formal clause by clause consideration. And I beg your indulgence as we make our way through this. The pages that are relevant to this part of today's proceedings are at pages 66 and 97 of the meeting pack, and pages 3 to 17 of the table pack for all the information. Following the informal deliberations on the clauses and the schedules of the Damage Return Investment Bill at our meeting on the 23rd of September, the committee agreed that it was content with the provisions of the bill and did not wish to bring forward any amendments at this stage. Whilst advising that they were content with the schedule as drafted, members did indicate that the provision of the 0.5 of the percentage point further margin of error in paragraph 10 may be something that they would want to come back to. Members also indicated that they may wish to give further consideration to the issues relating to the periodical payments order. The committee also noted the officials had confirmed that the department does not intend to bring forward any amendments to the bill at consideration stage. So following the discussions on the issues of the periodical payment orders at our meeting on the 23rd of September, the Department of Justice, as we asked, did review the Hansard and provide for us any further information or clarification on the process relating to PPOs to assist the committee in our consideration of the issue. The Department's response is at pages 3 to 7 of the table pack and was emailed to members yesterday. The Department has set out the requirements placed on the Court by the Damages Act 1996 and related court rules regarding periodical payment orders. The Department is of the view that in an individual case, it is a matter of the parties, based on legal and financial advice on their specific circumstances, to assess whether or not a PPO is preferable to a lump sum, and ultimately, where a case proceeds to the hearing, it is a matter for the Court. The Department has, however, suggested that the Committee may wish to consider writing to the Court Rules Committee, chaired by the Lady Chief Justice, to recommend that it considers adding to those factors that the Court is required to take into account when considering whether or not to make a PPO, and to invite the Lady Chief Justice to consider a judicial studies training event around PPOs. And I think it's helpful, I think it's useful in terms of that particular part of what we've considered previously. So if members are content in relation to that issue, would you be content that we write to Lady Chief Justice as suggested by the Department, and that this would be covered in the report and the bill? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, following the consideration of further information provided by the Department of Justice on the funding pressures faced in the current financial year, the Committee agreed to write to the Department of Finance and request information on the funding pressures arising from the change in the personal injuries discount rate that have been highlighted by other departments, and in particular the Department of Health, and whether these have been reflected in the discussions with the Treasury to secure additional funding. The response from the Department of Finance is at pages 8 to 11 of the table pack, was also emailed to members yesterday. The Department of Finance has indicated that the change in the PIDR will have a significant impact for the Department of Justice and the Department of Health. The forecasted costs are based on a number of assumptions, and due to the uncertainties, and the actual costs may change depending on the number and type of cases settled during the financial year. Discussions have been taking place between officials in all three departments, and discussions between the Department of Finance and the Treasury. They are also ongoing to secure funding for 2021-2022 pressures. The Department of Finance has also advised that while the PIDR may be higher than the current rate when the legislation is implemented, and therefore lead to a reduction in the costs for departments, it will still represent an increase from the previous rate of the 2.5%. From 2022 to 2023 onwards, no additional funding will be provided by the Treasury to offset any pressures arising from the PIDR, and the Executive will have to manage the costs through the normal budgetary process. So this is really to ask members to note the information provided by the Department of Finance, unless there's any other clarification that's required. And then the correspondence that has been received from the Forum of Insurance Lawyers and from BLM regarding the further margin of adjustment of the 0.5% in paragraph 10(2)(b) of the schedule of the bill. The letters cover the same issues as raised by the Association of the British Insurers and correspondence provided for the meeting of the 23rd of September regarding this adjustment, and both organisations asked the Committee to consider either removing or moderating it. Relevant correspondence can be found at pages 12 to 17 of the table pack, and was emailed to members yesterday. And if members want to raise or propose anything in relation to the provision of the 0.5 of a percentage point further margin of error before the formal clause by clause consideration. So if there was any comment that members want to make in that matter, and if there's no proposals that are made, then what we would do is we would propose to move forward to the clause by clause consideration of the bill. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I suppose we are receiving a bit of conflicting information here, because you know, I'm very alert to the fact that we've been told to keep our focus on the 100%. I am unapologetically on the side of leaning any favour towards the applicant or the victim in this case, but it's also now been presented to us that a few decisions we've made along the way are tipping the scales in favour of the victim or applicant. And I just wonder, given that we are knowingly doing that, and that's how it's being presented to us, is there any danger of us landing in a place that could be legally challenged? And I wonder if the committee has access to any sort of legal advice or support on that.
I would take the view on that anything that we decide ultimately, if it lands in the legislation, is legally challenged. I think that it would be more likely to be what ultimately ends up in the legislation, as opposed to us being legally challenged in terms of the decisions that we make here. But at the end of the day, we are public organisations, we are individuals, or we're a corporate body. So somebody out there could feel that they have a case to make. But I think that what we've endeavoured to do is to ensure that all the relevant information is at our disposal. We've asked all, I believe, the pertinent questions, and we've sought to be proportionate and fair across our consideration of this. And ultimately, it would be for organisations or an individual, if they felt that the legislation has landed in the wrong place, to be challenged in the courts. But we have no more redress for legal advice on that than anybody else has.
I think that's fair comment, Chair, and if I may, I think we have put clearly on record a lot of our thinking on this as well, and it's been well recorded by the clerk and staff, so I thank them for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel?
Apologies, Chair.
Okay.
That up from the last one as well, but no, just like Sinead had commented on, just in terms of there has been a significant amount of correspondence in the last couple of days, I believe, to all members. And then indeed wider membership of the Assembly as well, in terms of concern. So I think that we certainly have taken we've heard from people that we were advised at the start not to consider, and I think that we've done certainly a job of work asking questions. And I've nothing really else to say on that in terms of, did we have access to any form of legal advice on this? But you've sufficiently answered that, Chair.
Okay, members, if there's no specific proposals on contrary to where we are at in this issue, then we will now undertake the formal clause by clause consideration of the bill, and I beg your indulgence, and I will do this as expeditiously as I possibly can. We'll proceed through the clauses and the schedule of the bill and put the questions formally to the committee. So we'll commence with clause 1, the assumed return on investment. Is the committee content with clause 1 as drafted?
Content.
Clause 2, process for the setting of the rate of return. Is the committee content with clause 2 as drafted? I will take consent as silence unless someone says so, and if I go too quickly, then shout at me, okay? Thank you, because I know that members will be afraid who is it that's going to say content, so I just want to make sure that we manage it. So we're content with clause 2.
Mm-hmm.
Schedule C1 to the Damages Act 1996 as inserted, and that will, if we put, so that now has been dealt with, so that we're content. Yes, okay, thank you. Clause 3, ancillary provision. Is the committee content with clause 3 as drafted? Content. Clause 4, interpretation. Is the committee content with clause 4 as drafted? Content, thank you. Clause 5, commencement. Is the committee content with clause 5 as drafted? Content, thank you. Clause 6, the short title. Is the committee content with clause 6 as drafted? Thank you. Long title, and as this is the end of the clause by clause consideration of the bill, the committee must now consider the long title of the bill. Is the committee content with the long title of the bill? Content. Thank you, members, for your cooperation, and the draft report on the bill will then be prepared and will be circulated for consideration and agreement at our meeting on the 21st of October 2021. Thank you very much for your help in relation to that. We then move on to item 7, which is the Justice Bill, and that brings us to pages 99 and 105 of the meeting pack of the relevant papers. The committee stage of the Justice Bill commenced on the 14th of September. As agreed at our meeting on the 8th of July, the call for written evidence on the bill issued a week commencing the 16th of July, with a closing date of submissions of the 24th of September. A total of 43 responses have been received. 34 make substantive comments on the bill. The submissions will be uploaded to the electronic bill folder in the near future to enable members to consider them, and the proposals for an oral evidence sessions will be provided as soon as possible to enable these to be scheduled in November. And can I just ask or say to members to bear with our staff who are having considerable pressures placed upon them. There's a considerable amount of work, as you can appreciate, with the damages bill, this bill and other bills that the committee staff are working with. So if we can bear until that will be uploaded on the electronic bill folder. There will be a link sent to us. I just clarified this for myself, so I'll just share it with you. I asked naively, how do we access the electronics bill folder? There will be a link sent to us, and that, if we go onto that link, that will bring us in to the electronic bill folder. And if you keep that link, that will be your access. Okay?
Thank you, Chair, because I'm seeing difficulty. Thank you.
I just glad somebody else was asking the same questions. So that's the process, and that's what will happen in terms of that. So the 30 working day period provided under the standing orders for the completion of the committee stage of the bill is due to finish on the 1st of November. Standing orders provide that before the conclusion of the 30-day working period, a motion may be made to the Assembly by me as the chairman of the committee or the deputy chair on our behalf to extend the period of the committee stage. The motion must specify a date on which the committee stage will be extended. A provisional timetable for the committee stage of the bill has been prepared and can be found at pages 104 to 105 of the meeting pack. The timetable is based on an extension until the 28th of January 2022. While the intention will be to complete the committee stage of the bill earlier, if possible, the extension will enable the committee to complete the committee stage of the Damages Return on Investment Bill, which ends on the 28th of October, the Protection from Stalking Bill, which ends on the 10th of December, and the volume of other work the committee will need to progress during the October to January period, and also provides an appropriate time for detailed scrutiny, the consideration of the bill, and the preparation and the approval of the bill report. The Christmas recess period also takes place during the time that we're considering. Extending the committee stage until the 28th of January 2022 will still provide adequate time for the bill to complete its passage through the Assembly before the expected date of the end of the mandate in late March 2022. And just for your information, members, there are at least 3 other bills or other committees that are asking for extensions in relation to bills. So we're not going to be alone in relation to this. So are we content with the proposed timetable for the committee stage of the bill and to request the extension until the 28th of January 2022?
Agreed.
Thank you. So I have to formally put it to the committee that and this will then be lodged in the Business Office, that in accordance with Standing Order 334, the period referred to in Standing Order 332 be extended to the 28th of January 2022 in relation to the committee stage of the Justice, Sexual Offences and Tackling Trafficking Victims Bill, NIAO 29/17-22. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Then we will request that the debate on the motion is scheduled for Tuesday, the 19th of October. Now, the Department provided the Delegated Powers Memorandum for the bill yesterday, and this will be included in the pack for consideration at next week's committee meeting. Okay, members, that concludes that item of business. Thank you for your help on that. That brings us then to 1SR, which is the SR, and you'll find that on pages 107 to 202 of today's meeting pack, and it's in relation to the statute rule being made under the Insolvency Northern Ireland Order 1989 as applied by the Postal Services Act of 2011. 2011 Act puts in place a special postal administration regime designed to ensure the continuance of the universal postal service in the event that a company providing that service is at risk of entering insolvency proceedings, and this rule will provide the procedure for the special postal administration regime. The committee agreed at its meeting on the 4th of March 2021 that it was content with the proposal for the statutory rule, which is subject to negative resolution procedure. The Department has advised that there has been no change to the policy content since the SL1 was considered by the committee. The formal report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules will not be available until the 8th of October, but the Examiner has provided comments which are at page 19 of the table pack. The Examiner has indicated that there is a minor drafting error that the Department will address, but she is content that the rule will not otherwise be drawn to the she is content and she will draw the issue to the special attention of the Assembly, so it won't make any material change or difference. So, are members content with the statutory rule? And if you're content, I'll put the question. The Committee for Justice has considered SR 2021/257, Postal Administration's Rule Northern Ireland 2021, and there's no objection to the rule. Content?
Agreed.
Thank you. That brings us then to the legal update on the progress of the implementation of the Northern Ireland Audit and the PAC recommendations and action plan to address fraud and error. You'll find this information, members, at pages 204 to 337. Officials attended the meeting on the 11th of March to outline the Legal Service Agency's work to implement the recommendations of the Northern Ireland Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee's reports to address fraud and error. During the oral evidence session, the officials agreed to provide the committee with the Business Consultancy Service final report on a review of process governance and structures in the Legal Services Agency and the NISR report of 2020 on official error and legal aid payments when available. The committee also indicated that it would welcome a written progress update in 6 months' time. The Department sent the reports to the committee in July and has now provided a written update on the progress made across all areas, including the agency's fraud and error action plan and the action plan to implement the recommendations in the BCS final report. The Legal Services Agency is also proposing to provide a further update to the committee at the end of the current financial year. This is for members to note the information provided unless there is any further clarification is required, and agree to the Legal Services Agency proposal to provide a further update in March 2022. Thank you. Item number 10 is the Interim Victims for Crime Commissioner for Northern Ireland, and it's an update. You'll find that information on pages 339 to 373. The departmental officials attended the meeting of the committee on the 16th of September to outline the results of the consultation and the proposed way forward in relation to a new victim and witness strategy and the establishment of an Interim Victims Crime Commissioner for Northern Ireland. During the evidence session, the officials agreed to confirm the outcome of the discussions with the Minister of Justice on whether the Victims for Crime Commissioner designate would be able to apply for the statutory commissioner role and to provide further information on the advertisement for the post. The Department has indicated that, having considered legal advice and the approaches adopted by other departments in similar situations, the Minister has concluded that a Victims for Crime Commissioner designate will be able to apply for the future statutory positions. The Department has also set out details of the disqualifications that will apply to this public appointment competition and the rationale for these, and has provided in confidence a copy of the advertisement which will go into the post shortly. The Department intends to launch the competition in the very near future, and the departmental officials are therefore available via Starleaf to answer any further questions or queries that members may have. And we have with us Julie Wilson, the Deputy Director, Amanda Logan, the Grade 7 Victim Support and Judiciary Division, Department of Justice are available. And if members have any questions, then if you want to raise them now. If not, we just note this correspondence that has been sent to us. Okay, there's no queries then. We'll leave that. I suppose what we could do, members, what might be useful is we might be able to write to the department and maybe give us a rationale for deciding that the Commissioner designate can apply for the statutory position, given that they could be in post for up to 4 years beforehand, and will have a role in informing the development of the statutory role, which does not appear to give them, or which does appear to give them an advantage over other candidates. So we'll maybe seek clarification on that point, if you agreed.
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 Okay, thank you. Okay, members, that brings us then to item 11, which is correspondence. There are 8 items of correspondence at page 375 to page 423. And I'll draw your attention to one of those items, and then if any members have any other issues to raise, any of you could indicate. And it's item 11.4 at pages 384 to 391. And it's response from the Department of Justice to the Committee's request for information on the timescales for the implementations and recommendations in the Sigini report on the effect of penalty enforcement, a review of the impact of the current fine default strategy and services. The Department has confirmed that all recommendations attributed to it and the NI courts and tribunal services have been accepted, and has provided a table setting out the progress made to date in relation to each of the actions to be taken. The response also highlights that the final recommendation is a matter for the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And I would just seek agreement that we request an update on the implementation of the recommendations that fall to the Department and the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service in March 22, and also that we write to the PSNI to request information on progress to implement the recommendations for which they have responsibility. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
And then the only other one that I have is in relation to 1110 at page 21, and it's a letter from our colleague Claire Bailey, MLA, on our private members' bill on abortion services, safe access zones. The bill will be referred to the Committee for Health as it passes, if it passes second stage, which is scheduled for the 12th of October. However, parts of the bill may be relevant to Justice and the Health Committees, and is likely to request evidence from this committee on those parts. Claire has therefore requested to brief the committee on the bill. So if we could suggest that Claire is invited to brief the committee at our meeting on Thursday the 21st of October, as we have no oral briefing scheduled for that date. And if you're content to action the remaining, are we content we do that on the 21st?
Agreed.
Okay, agreed. Any queries or questions in relation to any other items of the correspondence? And if not, the remaining items will be covered as set out on the cover sheet of our papers today. Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 12, the Chair's business. I just have a couple of issues just to inform the members, and it's in relation to the correspondence of the Chairperson's Liaison Group, prioritisation of committee work programmes. A paper considered by the Chairperson's Liaison Group at its meeting on the 28th of September outlining the current work pressures facing committees, particularly those dealing with multiple bills, is at pages 425 to 429. The Chairperson's Liaison Group asked for the paper to be provided to all statutory committees, and that the issues highlighted are factored in to the prioritisation of work programmes. There are currently no plans for this committee to hold additional meetings, and the forward work programme will be monitored regularly to ensure the bill work is prioritised, and where possible other work items will be rescheduled as necessary. And it's just for members to note the CLG paper unless there's any other comment that members want to make. And then the other item was the informal meeting between the Northern Ireland Policing Board and the committee chair and deputy chair. And that is in relation to page 430 of the pack. I met with the chair of the Policing Board, Doug Beattie, on the 16th of September to discuss the interface between the board and the committee and how this has been working in this mandate. To enhance the positive working relationships that currently exist, the chair of the Policing Board, Doug Garrett, is proposing that the chairperson and the deputy chairperson of the committee should meet informally with the chair and the vice chair of the Policing Board approximately every 6 months to discuss key issues of interest. This will be alongside the formal communication and engagement between the committee and the board. And members, this is just to ensure, because there has been some crossover, and sometimes one element, either the Policing Board or the Justice Committee, feels that we are either intruding in their spatch or vice versa. And I just want to ensure that we are streamlined in what we're doing, and can assure you that there will be nothing that we'll miss, but it'll not be the exclusion of members of either the board or this committee. It's just to try and get a formal way of having an engagement along with what will happen generally as we do our business. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. No, that's no issues with that. Just will members of the Justice Committee be able to feed into issues that may be being raised to the Policing Board? Granted, I believe I'm the only one that is not represented on the Policing Board, and there's a number of issues with that. Just if the committee will be able to raise issues with yourselves to informally bring.
Yes, by all means, and I would certainly. I don't want any of the members of this committee to feel that somehow this is being done to exclude anybody. And what we will do is, prior to that discussion with the chairs and vice chairs, members of this committee will be quite at liberty to contact us to give us their issues that they feel needs to be raised, and we'll be more than happy to convey those. So I give you that assurance. I do appreciate your particular issue, Rachel, given the fact that you're the only member who doesn't have a political representative on the Policing Board. So that means that I want to be open and transparent and ensure that nobody is excluded. Okay, are we agreed? Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Chair.
Who's that?
Sinead Ennis.
Sorry, Sinead. Yes, Sinead.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. My screen's froze, so hopefully you can hear me okay. No, listen, no issue with that whatsoever, but just want to ensure the informality of any such arrangement. Obviously, it's important that we don't encroach on each other's separateness in our own work stream. So happy to participate as long as we're on the understanding that it's on an informal basis.
Yes, and just to assure you, and it's in my brief if I didn't read it out properly, but it is underlined that we should meet informally. So that is a give in relation to that. Okay?
No problem, Chair.
Okay. And that brings us then, members, to any other business. Has any member any other business that they wish to raise? I just have one issue that I want and it came up in the House the other day, and I just want to get your approval for us to write to the Minister. It's in relation to the introduction of the Animal Cruelty Register, and there seem to be some queries or questions raised as to what had or hadn't been done by the Department of Justice. So it's just to get your approval that we write to the department and seek an update in relation to their input in relation to this issue of the Animal Cruelty Register. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, if there's no other issues, members, in relation to matters or business, members, can I just then say that our meeting, the next meeting will take place of the committee on Thursday the 14th of October at 2 p.m. in the Senate chamber. So that's just to remind members that it's in the Senate chamber. Thank you for your time and wish you a good evening, and we'll now formally adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee